everyone. Welcome to Uncontrolled Opposition, where together we battle mind wars with truth strikes. I'm Gloria, Guillo, an investigative journalist, and I'm here with Professor Jeremy Kuzmarov, managing editor of Covert Action magazine. Our producer and engineer is Jamie Cheeslice. The opinions you hear are ours and that of our guest, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. This content is intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as professional or legal advice. Listeners are encouraged to form their own opinions. Today's show is part 2 in our series that uncovers the true story of the Octopus Murders. The Netflix film titled American Conspiracy, The Octopus Murders, that won an Emmy in June in the investigative documentary category, misrepresented facts, draws fictional conclusions, and harms reputations and legacies. Our distinguished guests include Peter Osborne, Australian physicist, political researcher, and whistleblower, and his colleague and attorney, Daniel P. Sheehan, constitutional and public interest attorney, legal activist, educator, and author. Some of the notable cases he's been involved in are the Pentagon Papers, Karen Silkwood, and Iran-Contra. Before we get into the meat of the Octopus Murders, let's first outline the relationship between the intelligence community and Hollywood. Through the CIA's Office of Public Affairs and its entertainment industry liaison, the CIA has for decades worked directly with producers, directors, and studios to shape how intelligence activities are portrayed in the media. The purpose goes beyond technical accuracy and access. It is narrative management, controlling how covert power is imagined by the public. This focus became more intense after the 1970s Church and Pike committees brought the CIA's illegal, immoral, and unconstitutional activities into public scrutiny. According to FOIA releases, the Pentagon and CIA together influenced more than 1,800 film and television scripts just between 1911 and 2017 alone. But narrative control is not just about glorifying the intelligence community. It is also about neutralizing dissenters or dangerous counter-narratives. Netflix, The Octopus Murders, serves as a case in point. Marketed as an investigative documentary, the series covers the suspicious death of journalist Danny Casolaro in 1991. Casolaro was investigating what he termed the octopus, a hidden network linking intelligence agencies, defense contractors, and organized crime across multiple covert operations. Just as he was coming to profound conclusions, he was found dead in a hotel bathtub with multiple deep slashes to his wrists after telling family and colleagues that if he was found dead, it would not be suicide. Yet rather than challenge the official narrative, the Octopus Murders functions as control narrative reinforcement. It casts Casolaro as a troubled obsessive. It repackages the suicide explanation. It undermines the credibility of whistleblowers who sought to expose links between intelligence agencies, surveillance software, arms trafficking, and organized crime. In effect, the series closes the case for the public while appearing to open it. The challenge here is not merely to resist overt propaganda, but to expose and decode the more sophisticated forms of narrative control. And there are no two people better to do it than Peter and Danny. Gentlemen, please tell us about yourselves, how you got mixed up in the Octopus Murders, why this film fails the rigor of what should be deemed an investigative documentary, and how the Emmy Award it received is horribly misplaced.
In 2001, I started investigating the Promus software being sold to Australia and in contact with Bill Hamilton, the president of Inslaw Inc. And in 2004, June 2004, I'm communicating by letters with Michael Riconosciuto, and he's sharing with me all the evidence that he gave to Danny Casolaro, who was murdered, we believe murdered, in August 1991. At the same time, I'm collaborating with a veteran investigative journalist from Canada, Gordon Sivell, and Gordon filed a Freedom of Information access request to the Martinsburg Police to see if we could get access to the official BCCI evidence files. They notified us in writing that they were informed by FBI to seal it, despite it being ruled a suicide, and that we couldn't get access to it. In 2018, I contacted the original detective, George Shortwood, who was the Deputy Commissioner, Chief for Police of Martinsville Police at the time, telling him that I've got 4 recorded interviews with witnesses that he never interviewed, who were talking to Danny Casolaro on the last day. His lawyers wrote back to me saying that the case is closed and they want nothing more to do with it. Then on the Netflix series in 24, I see the same attorney handing over the box of evidence to the producers of the Netflix series. I contacted the attorney demanding how it had been unsealed, or was it really sealed, and then invited us to refile a new access for information request, which we did. So Gordon and I scanned everything in the evidence box. And today we would like to share, and particularly Danny, Sheehan, the expert on the legal side, will be able to summarise most of the evidence that's in the box, but also the evidence that's missing from the box still, which we know existed. So I'd like to hand over to Daniel, and Daniel can give a summary for the audience on the legal evidence that we actually have found in the box that's critical.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Okay, look, the questions that Gloria has put is, how did each of us get involved in this particular thing, this Octopus series of murders? I was involved because I was the chief counsel in the major federal criminal racketeering act, civil prosecution that was the initial cause of the Iran-Contra scandal back in the 80s. That I was the chief counsel at the United States Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C., in their social ministry office, and had been involved in legal cases that had uncovered a portion of the activities that were being engaged in by this massive global conspiracy that has been uncovered in detail by Danny Casolaro and by Peter Osborne. I was prosecuting a particular piece of it, which was the now infamous off-the-shelf, standalone, self-financing, private covert operation enterprise that became the heart of the Iran-Contra scandal that resulted in the criminal indictment and prosecution and conviction of 14 people at the highest levels of the Reagan-Bush administration, but which ended with George Bush Sr. Pardoning key members of that enterprise in order to stave off the investigation running all the way up into including George Bush himself, who was a major player in this operation. That because I was prosecuting those people, and it broke into the public view when Eugene Hasenfuss was shot down over Nicaragua and was captured. And I was contacted by the Nicaraguan government and asked to facilitate getting Eugene Hasenfuss to confess the details of what their operation was, and he did that. And that broke it all loose, and Congress was compelled to hold public hearings, and then the hearings started putting pressure on, and the Attorney General of the United States, Edwin Meese, a key player in this larger conspiracy, felt compelled to appoint a special prosecutor. And he asked for the special prosecutor to be appointed, and Judge Lawrence Walsh was appointed, and he began this criminal investigation. So I was involved at the highest levels of this issue of the Iran-Contra enterprise. And in that context, Danny Casolaro called me. He called me on the Thursday afternoon before he left the following day to go down to Martinsburg He contacted me because he had come across during his investigation of this large-scale, long-running criminal enterprise. He had come across a number of the defendants whom we had sued in the Federal Criminal Racketeering Act case. We had named 29 of these people. Let's say, and so the bottom line is Danny had contacted me because one of the defendants, Richard Secord, kept on calling him and trying to basically intimidate him and coerce him into stopping his investigation. And Danny told me that he had now developed kind of conclusive evidence, which he was going down to supplement. He was going down to Martinsburg, Virginia, because the Internal Revenue Service office down there had basic information that he had developed a source inside the IRS in that office that were going to turn the copies over to him. And this was going to give him the final nail in the coffin, basically, evidence against these people, including Richard Secord and George Bush and people like Bill Casey and Al Haig, a whole series of people, Frank Carlucci. There's a whole group of people that were involved in the off-the-shelf Iran-Contra criminal enterprise that were part of this larger conspiracy. And Danny explained that to me. Now, this was the first realization that I had that the enterprise that we had cornered and had identified and were successfully getting criminally prosecuted was part of a much larger and longer lasting type of enterprise. I had, in fact, in the major federal criminal complaint that we filed in the Federal Criminal Racketeering Act, a complaint against the off-the-shelf enterprise, which most people misperceived as Oliver North's operation that he was running out of the Reagan-Bush White House. That we had tracked the origins of this at least all the way back to 1960, and had begun tracking it out of the criminal operations that were going on to try to overthrow the government of Fidel Castro, and the assassination program that they had going, the criminal drug smuggling that they were doing, the money laundering, and all of the operations that they were engaged in. Because of that, we had become a central focal point of that investigation. And it was we were referenced a number of times in the major Senate and House hearings on the convictions that were generated by the special prosecutor. It was in that context that I mentioned that Danny Casolaro called me just the Thursday before he was murdered. And so I became knowledgeable, at least, about the larger conspiracy. But we were focused on one particular venture of this larger ongoing enterprise. And as I say, Danny had explained to me the general contours of the larger scale enterprise, of which this was a venture. And so I knew about that. And then when I saw that he'd been killed, and I realized from the information that he had at least 12 to 14 gigantic gashes, basically in his forearms, that were deep into his arms, enough to basically sever the tendons in his arms. That it was impossible for him to conceivably have cut the tendons in both of his arms, because when he cut the tendons in his first arm, his hand would be useless, and he couldn't do it. So I was stunned that they were declaring this to be a suicide. And I heard that the family had immediately contacted the police in Martinsburg, had demanded that the body not be embalmed, that there be an examination of the body. And I've had 50 years of experience in dealing with local police departments when they encounter what appears on the face of it to be a major covert operation, murder. And they recoil historically in the face of any such encounter and realize that it is vastly above their pay grade. and they do not want to become involved in this. So they and since he was found in the bathtub, bled out in the bathtub, and this alleged perfunctory suicide note, simply saying, "Oh, I'm sorry for this," and all the boxes were missing. He had already gotten the boxes from the Internal Revenue Service down there. He had met with a major Arab-looking individual down there. The police had a sketch of the Arab person that he had met with. There were witnesses, the housemaids and stuff at the motel where he was. Had provided sworn statements asserting that she had seen a person coming out of Danny Casolaro's room right at the point where he was murdered. She actually generated a sketch of this, and it was clear that this was this fellow Joseph Coella. Anybody who knew Joseph Coella, who was an assassin, actually, for the covert operations people, Theodore Shackley, who was the head of covert operations for the Central Intelligence Agency under George Bush, and that the people who Danny had been mentioning that he was going after overlapped substantially with the head leadership of the 29 defendants that we had civilly prosecuted, and we're succeeding in getting Special Prosecutor Lawrence Walsh to criminally prosecute, and we're being publicly named in the Senate and House hearings in front of the whole country. Okay, so that's how I got involved. And then we went on to proceed with the criminal prosecution of the people that we had originally named, succeeding in getting them prosecuted, going up the chain, going toward Bill Casey and going toward George H.W. Bush, going toward the National Security Advisor for Bush, Donald P. Gregg, a lot of these other people at the top levels when George Bush Sr. succeeded in getting elected president. And he issued pardons for all of the people that were capable of potentially testifying against him. And then a major campaign was mounted by the covert community under Theodore Shackley, George H.W. Bush's director of covert operations in the CIA, to besmirch the reputation of Lawrence Walsh, the special prosecutor, started attacking him, saying that, for example, when he traveled home from Washington, D.C. for the months that he was conducting the prosecution, that he traveled in first class at government expense, like that was supposed to undermine his credibility as a prosecutor. So the bottom line is we had followed that all the way through to as far as we could get those people criminally prosecuted. And then it was years later that Peter Osborne contacted me. And he said, look, I've been going through some of the notebooks of Danny Casolaro, and I see your telephone number and notes from Danny Casolaro of him having spoken with you about the joint members of the conspiracy that you were civilly prosecuting and the one that he was investigating. And so can you share with me what it is that it looked like to you? And so I said, yeah, I'll explain it to you. It only takes the drop of a hat for somebody to motivate me to start relating who these people were. I was totally frustrated over the fact that we couldn't get them all.
Could we backtrack just a tiny bit? I'd like to just, how was his body found? He had the gashes on his arms. And I believe I had read that he was missing 3 fingernails. I'm not sure if you came across that, but I thought that was really, unusual.
Well, I mean,
in a suicide.
Yeah, the entire suicide was so preposterous. I mean, with all of the evidence surrounding his investigation, all the people that he had talked to, his family members, his best friend, others. He was constantly telling them about the evidence that he had and detailing it for them. And that he was going to be meeting with at least two different sources down there, in addition to the IRS people. That he was getting the boxes of records from, and he was after the checks. He kept on asserting that that there were checks that had a lot of it had to do with the sale of tow missiles that were central to the case that I was prosecuting, and that he had direct evidence of the checks that were written to pay for the tow missiles and the other weapons, and so Danny had all of that evidence, and when the police got called by the people at the motel to say that there was this dead body in the tub, the Martinsburg police came, and they started gathering together some of the remnants of what was left there, but all the boxes of IRS documents had been taken away. All kinds of other things had been taken away out of there, but they found in Danny Casolaro's shoe a list of the key names of the conspirators in the enterprise that he was talking about. But he had notes that weren't with him, that were back in his office, that were recovered by Peter. And Peter took the steps of contacting the Martinsburg police and trying to explain to them, look, this is not a suicide. Let me explain to you what we have here. Here are the names of the different people that he had. Look at the names of the people in his shoe. Look at what was going on here. And so what happened is Peter began a major independent investigation over and above the extremely perfunctory and summary type of investigation that the Martinsburg police had provided. And he began his quest to find out what was going on. And Peter and I have been discussing this, kind of weekly, down through the years here, of saying, look, somebody needs to do an important documentary film about this, a film series about this, explaining how Danny Casolaro was clearly murdered by this Joseph Coella, and who he was and who he was working directly with, and getting access to the telephone records of Danny Casolaro, showing who was calling him, showing that Richard Secord was calling him, etc. And so Peter was basically pounding on the door of the Martinsburg police, offering to give them all of this information and evidence. And they were basically saying, I'm not listening. I want to make it really clear we're not going to do anything about this, until suddenly, this other documentary film appears. This four-part or three-part series, laying out initially some of the evidence that Danny Casolaro was gathering together. And then about halfway through the second episode, all of a sudden, they started taking this nosedive in the documentary film, starting to talk about how Danny Casolaro had been drinking heavily, how he was extremely frustrated, how, they started going through his records and saying, he had a few debts that he hadn't paid, so he must have been extremely frustrated about this, and it was directly contrary to basically everything that he'd been saying to everybody. He was explaining to everybody the evidence he had. He was telling everybody how completely optimistic he was about getting these additional witnesses. So that what happened is when I saw this documentary series, American Conspiracy, the Octopus Murders, I said, oh, great, look at these young guys, Christian Hansen and this fellow Zachary they've put together this documentary. I'm going to be sure to watch it. And so I say I got partway into the second episode, and I started saying, wait a second, where is this thing going? And then all of a sudden they started attacking Peter Osborne, and they started attacking Michael Riconosciuto, who was a key witness to the entire enterprise of what was going on, because Michael Riconosciuto was actually part of it. He was the guy that put the back door into a critical piece of software, which was being used by this enterprise to spy on everybody. This thing was all being coordinated through people such as the caliber of Bill Casey, who became the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. I was in one step removed communication with Bill Casey. I was actually meeting face to face with the person that was doing the autobiography for Bill Casey. I was the one that conveyed to Bill Casey through his autobiographic co-author the fact that we had discovered the tow missile sale and that we had tracked the money coming from the tow missile sale to the Contras. Well, I was the one that conveyed that to Bill Casey, right? And Bill Casey is the one who then obviously conveyed this information to Oliver North and to Tom Green, his lawyer, so that they went to the Oliver North's office and started destroying the documents. I mean, I was that intimately connected with what it is that's going on here. I have not taken the position that somehow they operated on Bill Casey's brain to kill him and eliminate him. I don't agree with that at this point. But what I'm saying is it
was a coincidence, at least.
Well, there's a lot of coincidences. One of the things that professional investigators need to be able to do is to distinguish actual coincidences from actual evidence. But what we do know is that Bill Casey was intimately involved in this larger enterprise. We know that Theodore Shackley, who was the CIA covert operations director for George Bush Sr., was directly involved. We know that George Bush Sr. was directly involved. His national security advisor, Donald P. Gregg, were directly involved. We knew all the details of these players in this portion of it. And what Peter Osborne was discovering, because Peter, this is an important piece for people to understand. Peter had a unique entree into this major enterprise, this global enterprise, because he had been screwed over by these people in his business, and it had motivated him to actually go to the lengths of getting access to the classified portions of the records of a particular bank in Australia. This was the Nugan Hand Bank. And it turns out the Nugan Hand Bank had played a key role in my investigation, because I knew that the Nugan Hand Bank in Australia had been set up by Frank Nugan and Michael Hand in coordination to some degree with Theodore Shackley, who had become the head of covert operations for the CIA under George Bush Sr., because that's where they were putting the money that they were getting from the opium trafficking in Southeast Asia. That Theodore Shackley, as the CIA station chief earlier in Saigon, had formed a criminal partnership with Vang Pao, the number one opium warlord in Laos, and they were shipping opium out and smuggling heroin out of into the United States, and cocaine later. So we had tracked all this, and we knew about the Nugan Hand Bank, and because Peter Osborne had gotten at the classified portions of the Nugan Hand Bank, he began an investigation, a research investigation that was detailed to the information that was in the Nugan Hand Bank, who the people were who had the accounts, what other banks they were in direct communication with. And what he discovered is by following the money through the Nugan Hand Bank, and realizing that not only were they laundering money from drugs, but they were in fact smuggling gold that had been criminally seized by the covert operators out of the Philippines, for example, and that they were using this to help finance their criminal covert operations. And they were doing it all under the color and cloak of national security, because these guys were in positions of power, of George H.W. Bush as the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Bill Casey as the later director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Theodore Shackley as the director of covert operations for the CIA. These people were using the color of the authority of their office and their mission to try to deal with the Soviet Union primarily.
Yeah.
They had extended that to conducting themselves as a massive criminal operation, and these individuals were funneling money out of those accounts into their private accounts, so that they were setting up, they were embezzling money basically from the covert operations funds that they were engaged in as high-ranking government officials in the United States Intelligence Agency, and they were enriching themselves while they were doing this. Now, my basic gripe against them was the fact that they were criminals and that their whole covert operations were criminal. And Peter was focusing on the fact that they were wetting their beak in taking money privately, and they were screwing over people. And Peter can tell you all about that.
I'll jump in here, Danny, and Jeremy and Gloria. This is a letter that's from the Martinsburg police, official records. We believe that they got it from the hotel room. They had taken all of it. Whoever had cleaned out his room took a briefcase full of documents. We have the witness statement of maids. When opening the door, Danny Casolaro had a briefcase stuffed full of documents on the bench inside. That's missing from his room. We know there are 5 boxes of documents that he recovered from IRS that relates to all of the CIA's operations that were being investigated in Australia. I want you to know this, with the mafia, with Robert Booth Nichols and his colleagues, that go straight to the funding of the airlines for Iran-Contra with Ted Shackley, Thomas Kleins, and Richard Secord for flying the arms and drugs. That evidence is missing from Danny Casolaro's car. More important, this letter confirms that the motive to kill him was that Danny Casolaro went with the checks and the bank accounts. And how do we know that? Because Gordon Savell and I have all our recorded interviews, and so do the police, that before Danny Casolaro went to Martinsburg, Ben Mason, his best friend, testifies that Danny Casolaro laid out on the carpet, on the floor, all the signed checks and accounts at Monte Carlo, BCCI, with all these transactions. That's in this particular letter. Now, this letter is in the research files of Danny Casolaro with the checks, with all the accounts. And I'm going to put up on the screen for you, I'll put up for you the cover-up of the BCCI accounts. And here, from the BCCI records and investigation, it is confirming that the bank is being owned by Faisal Falouj, who's a Kuwaiti down here, Faisal Saud Al Fawad, Kuwaiti businessman, BCCI. He's the secret owner of First American Bank. And I have all the records of the Senate inquiry. Senator Kerry demanded that Robert Altman hands across all the accounts and payments to Adnan Khashoggi and Kuzmarov, including all the transactions at the Monte Carlo branch. They knew about them. I have confirmed and interviewed Jack Blum, who was the lead investigator. He has confirmed categorically to me that those checks and bank accounts were never provided to the inquiry by Robert Altman or the Martinsburg police or FBI or the Department of Justice when they had full access to all of Danny Casolaro's research files that had a backup copy. That's what he had in his briefcase he took with him. The most important thing is Faisal Saud al-Falluj, the secret owner. I have the letter of Robert Altman submitted to the inquiry that Robert Altman had the power of attorney to represent all these transactions. We also have a witness who we've recorded our interviews with, and William Turner. He testifies. The police want him to give a testimony because he met Danny Casolaro in the car park in the afternoon on the Friday. He delivered 2 sealed envelopes of documents that he kept in his safe for safekeeping for Danny for this particular meeting, that he wanted to get some information to source.
And this is the car park at the motel.
At the motel, that's correct.
Right.
And he doesn't want to talk to the police because he's fearful. He's just seen Danny Casolaro murdered. He said he wants to talk to Elliot Richardson, the attorney of Inslaw, because he knew it related to the Promus software and the evidence that Danny Casolaro had. He provides an affidavit to Elliot Richardson confirming that Danny Casolaro was in Martinsburg to meet with Robert Altman, the attorney, who was fearful that Danny Casolaro was going to give his evidence of the BCCI checks to the committee. And he swears that he met with Danny, he handed the records across, other documents, and there are 2 big stuffed envelopes that were sealed that he kept are missing from the room as well. So we have 2 independent witnesses that he's got the BCCI checks and the Monte Carlo accounts. It turns out that Faisal Saud Falluj is the chairman of Kuwait Airlines and also the chairman of Kuwait International Finance Company for the royal family of Kuwait. And we have the testimony that Robert Altman, who is working for CIA for William Casey, gives testimony in court that those $1 million and $4 million checks that are signed and gone across from BCCI were financed by Faisal Saud Falluj because he worked for him at Watergate Hotel for the chairman of Kuwait Airlines, and he also worked for the Kuwait ambassador because the office of the embassy and Kuwait Airlines are all at the Watergate Hotel.
And Peter, to make clear to them, these are the checks that were paying for the TOW missiles.
That's correct.
This is at the heart of the Iran-Contra scandal.
Here they are, up on the screen.
These people were selling TOW missiles to Iran in exchange for them agreeing to hold the hostages.
That's correct.
That they would refuse to let the hostages go until after the election of Ronald Reagan. This is the heart of the Iran-Contra scandal. That the House and Senate said they couldn't figure out who did it. And there's
the transactions. That letter that the Martinsburg police is the front letter. These are the checks in the research file. Transactions at the Monte Carlo. Can you see the transactions of 18 million? There's the signature of the BCCI check with Guillo. This one, here's one here with manager Guillo and the other one there. And then Khashoggi and the 1 and 4 million check. Dates and times, 1985. In addition to that, here are the letterheads of BCCI confirming the transactions across to all the accounts. Now, these are the evidence documents that were with that letter that were in a backup copy was shown to Ben Mason on the carpet, and Danny Casolaro also had a backup copy in his research files at his house.
What the bottom line is that what Peter has been able to prove through the documents is the absolute proof that these people were, and Danny Casolaro had found the proof that got to the bottom of the Iran-Contra scandal. These are the checks that were used to pay for the TOW missiles. Additional people would have gone to prison as a result of this, but the Martinsburg police didn't do anything about it. Even though they knew that Danny Casolaro, they could tell that Danny Casolaro had been murdered because they didn't want to venture into this whole territory, because the type of people that you're dealing with, Richard Secord and Bill Casey and Theodore Shackley, and these people are the highest level officials working with George Bush Sr., who had become president of the United States. And it was just like the banks that were too big to fail.
That's correct.
In the 2008 economic crisis, these people are too big to prosecute. And so the Martinsburg police basically covered up the murder.
And look at that, Danny. 4 days before Danny dies, Lawrence Walsh has indicted Dwayne Claridge, Richard Secord, all the parties involved with the lying of the tow missile deal.
That's right.
4 days. So this is the motive for killing Danny Casolaro. Those checks and transactions were demanded by Senator Kerry for Robert Altman to hand across. The fact is that
Christian Hansen and Zachary, the guys that did this documentary film, knew all of this.
Exactly.
They knew all of this.
In 2018, I shared all this evidence with them, and I produced a podcast for 2 hours with all the evidence that the audience can see right now. Yeah. That's what the producers had, and they're asking me questions. What's the importance of these checks? I said it's a smoking gun to kill him. I knew that evidence was in the box. We knew that they had the evidence, but they stopped us for 20 years to get it, telling us that it's sealed, but they're happily handing it across 20 years later to a Netflix pseudo conspiracy film to say that he committed suicide, when in actual fact, 4 days before, all the people being indicted are going to be crucified if those checks come out, because that's the transactions that Dwayne Claridge was fully aware of. Now, Dwayne Claridge is being indicted with Richard Secord, Ted Shackley. Now, I have a statement given by one of the best friends of Danny Casolaro that on July 4th, Danny Casolaro and George Pittaway met a girlfriend of Ted Shackley at a party. And she went home with them back to Danny's house for drinks. Later that night, Danny Casolaro caught her secretly going through all his research files. Do you know that's in the handwriting of the detective, George Swartwood, who did the investigation? It's in his handwriting.
Yeah.
It says, girlfriend of Ted Shackley goes home, found going through, because they're looking for the checks. And
the bottom line is, everybody's got to understand, again, that this is the key. And that this information was in the hands of Christian Hansen and Zachary, the director. And either one of two things is true. Either they simply were not intelligent enough to realize what the information was telling them, even though it's right in your face here, or they intentionally ignored it. Now, when I met with them, when I was so upset over the portrayal of Danny Casolaro being kind of a frustrated, heavy drinking guy in debt that could well have killed himself, and they attacked Peter Osborne and Michael Riconosciuto, and I was so upset about it. When I found out that they were in Los Angeles, I went to meet with them. And I sat down specifically, and I said to Zachary, I said, how in the world could you tell me on a scale of 1 to 100, what is your level of probability about Danny Casolaro having committed suicide or as having been murdered? And he said, well, I'm kind of close. It's sort of like 49 to 51. And I said, well, what's the 51? Well, the 51% probable that he killed himself. And I said, what? I said, look, how could he possibly have severed the tendons in his left arm and then severed the tendons in his right arm with his left hand? And I said, it's impossible for them to have done that. And he said, well, he could have done is severed all the tendons in his left arm and then held the razor blade in his teeth and then severed all of the tendons in his right arm. I said, held the razor in his teeth. I said, that's preposterous. And he said, well, look, frankly, I don't give a shit. You know, whether he committed suicide or he was murdered, I just wanted to have a good story. That is exactly what he said to me. You know,
That's it.
And I was just flabbergasted that he would say something like that. Now, I thoroughly understand that being an investigative attorney prosecuting bad guys for being criminals is different than just being a journalist that wants to get a good story, you know, and it doesn't mean that he ought to go to prison or something for perjury. But the bottom line is that this was an absolute dive that they took in this documentary film, and because it dealt with such important things, even though they completely failed to come to the proper conclusion, it was interesting enough to the outside world to generate an Emmy Award. But the problem is that it goes in exactly the wrong direction.
It does.
And it has exactly the wrong effect. So what we're saying is there needs to be a new series, new documentary series that needs to be
legal evidence,
to set forth all the legal evidence and make very clear to people what it is that happened, that Danny Casolaro was clearly murdered in this case, as were several other people the course of investigating this. And to not spend all of our time just necessarily beating up on these, lackluster documentarians, but to in fact get the right thing done and have it told. And that documentary, the properly done documentary series that shows that Danny Casolaro was not only murdered, but what it was that he had uncovered, would then generate an ongoing series, an actual television series, like, as I've said, like the Game of Thrones, to actually lay out in a cable drama, with a scripted drama, laying out who these people are and what it is they've done, that they should not have been able to get away with it in Iran-Contra, to all of a sudden say, oh, this was too complicated. There were too many foreign names in it, and the House and Senate couldn't quite figure out, what was really going on. It was absolutely clear what was going on. And it was now absolutely clear the larger scale of what was going on, and it needs to be revealed to the world. That's what's important.
I think the motive to have him killed was those checks were desperately requested by Senator Kerry and also Jack Blum. I have my recorded interviews with Jack Blum. He states categorically, if Danny had those checks in Virginia, in CIA territory, what did he think would happen? And I said, so you believe that got him killed, that was a risk? And he agreed. Second, he confirmed that neither Martinsburg Police, FBI, or Department of Justice that had access to everything I'm showing you here, these letters from Lawrence Walsh are with the checks. They're in the same research folder sequentially. And this is Lawrence Walsh raising serious concerns earlier with George Bush Sr. about the protection of criminals. The criminals that were indicted 4 days before Danny dies over those tow missiles and the payments through BCCI. And we know that was the smoking gun that Danny had, and the evidence is in the Martinsburg police. Not only that, the testimonies of everyone are telling the police that Danny went with those checks and he was going to meet with Robert Altman because Robert Altman was fearful that Danny was going to give that evidence to the inquiry. And
to John Kerry.
I've interviewed the attorney to Robert Bickle. His attorney gave this to Danny Casolaro. He gave him all the evidence. And Robert Bickle was being shut down because he was exposing that all of the dual technologies and weapons were also being sold to Saddam Hussein by the same group. And those bank accounts is known as the 2.5 billion brokers of death deal. And Danny Casolaro held, and I've got it, the personal handwritten notes that they've been discovered by customs. They're now shutting down all the front intelligence companies of CIA and Mossad and French intelligence in Singapore. And the next question they ask is, what does Oliver North want to do with Noriega's drug contacts? That's in Danny's file with these checks. And at the same time as Danny Casolaro is being murdered, Ari Ben Menashe and Richard Babian are testifying against Robert Gates about the cover-up of the $2 billion broker of death deal. And Danny's dealing with both of them. And not only that, Ari Ben Menashe is in Australia testifying to our Royal Commission in the week that Danny about all the transactions of the arms going through Australia and the payments for the Promus software. So this evidence that I'm showing the audience, I gave all this to the producers of Netflix. They promised that they would help me with Trey Casolaro to reopen the file, and we were blocked for 20 years when the evidence of the witness statements, seeing all this evidence, and I'll repeat for the audience, I contacted the deputy chief of Martinsburg Police, George Swartwood, who did this whole investigation and ruled it a suicide. And I said, I've got recorded interviews with 4 independent witnesses that spoke to Danny Casolaro on the Friday. He told them he had met with William Turner. He's picked up all documents from IRS. He's excited and he's going to come. He'll be back Monday morning and give him a call. Now, that's on recorded interviews with me. And these people, 3 of them have passed away. 2 of them have passed away. 2 are still alive and are willing to testify in any court that Danny Casolaro wasn't depressed. He had everything. So where's the briefcase with the documents? Where's the checks? Where's the 5 boxes of IRS documents? And Gloria, we'll do a follow-up interview, but when you see the evidence that was in the Martinsburg Police, I've got the official letters from the attorneys of the Department of Justice and Treasury wanting to know, have they recovered any further documents with the following people that Danny Casolaro picked up from Treasury?
If we stay focused on what happened to Danny Casolaro, what the evidence was that he had, what the efforts are that we've been making to get the Martinsburg Police to accept this, to reopen the investigation, that it was clearly Joseph Quiller that killed him. Just we stay focused on that, because we've got to try to get the listening audience to do something about this. To say, wait a second, this is really astonishing. Somebody's got to do something about this. I mean, John Kerry is still alive. Jack Blum is still alive. The people who professed to be really interested in trying to get to the bottom of these things are still alive. John Kerry is still in office.
Yeah, I think Senator Kerry would be the key person to help us get this investigation open for Trey Casolaro.
And so that somebody needs to do something about this, and so that's the purpose of having this particular discussion, and is to point out that the Emmy Award winning documentary film that's been just put out is false. And that the impression that it left that Danny Casolaro killed himself, and it was really a whole lot of boogaloo, spooky stuff. But in the final analysis, he just killed himself because he was behind in his payments on stuff. This is silly, and something needs to be done about it, more than just doing the documentary film that tells the real story. The government officials need to do something about this. The problem is that it goes so high. It goes so high, and it deals with Bill Casey. It deals with George Bush Sr. It deals with, Frank Carlucci. It deals with Theodore Shackley. It deals with all kinds of these people, a lot of whom are dead now. Yeah. And so that they all want to say, oh, look, most of these people are dead now. Let's not do anything about it. But the reality is they didn't do anything about it even at the time. Yes. Even though the information is there, and so that they're concerned about it casting dispersion on them. and the effectiveness of their investigation, which is the point of the covert action bulletin, is to point out that the law enforcement system in our country has been fundamentally corrupted by the activities of the covert operations people in the national security state. And when you try to bring the instrumentalities of law enforcement to bear against them, nothing happens. There's a whole lot of up and down the hill. Oh, wow, look at, there's all kinds of mysterious stuff happened in Iran-Contra. And basically, they let everybody walk away.
With impunity, they continue to be able to carry out these scale of crime that you're describing in the past. We know that a lot of nefarious things are still going on because this immunity persists. So
Yes.
I would say that underscores Danny's point of the importance.
Yeah.
The reason I had mentioned Michael Riconosciuto was because it's my understanding that he was a major influencer on Danny Casolaro.
Yes.
Is that true?
Two things. One, he was in prison. His business associate, Monty Alexander, was providing Danny with access to the legal evidence that he was investigating. I'll just summarize this. I have my recorded interviews with Monty Alexander, who's passed away. He was the accountant and business manager of a company called Certec with Michael Riconosciuto. Their business partners were Richard Secord and Albert Hakim. They were making the night scopes for the machine guns that were being sold to the Iran-Contra.
The point of this is that that there is a key witness that was denigrated in the documentary, which any kind of objective analysis of what it is that he was saying and why it is he knew what it was he was saying is easily established. Okay, and so that's the key to this thing. That's why this part is relevant. And the fact is that Michael Riconosciuto was directly involved with these criminals. and so to turn around in the documentary and say, oh, by the way, this guy was a criminal. He ended up going to jail, and therefore, he's not credible. I mean, the fact of the matter is, these are the exact kind of people who are the key witnesses in any important case like this. And so the fact that Michael Riconosciuto was involved with them in criminal activity does not undermine his credibility with regard to the specific evidence he was providing against them.
This is a recorded interview that Gordon Savell and I have with Michael's wife. She received a telephone call from Danny Casolaro on the Friday, told her that he's met with William Turner. He's picked up all the documents from IRS. We're ready. We've got them. I'll get back to you. Now, she's one of 4 independent witnesses that spoke to Danny Casolaro on Friday. So this is the evidence that I offered to George Swartwood. I have 2 of them are dead, but 2 are alive and willing to testify that he was not depressed. He picked up this evidence. And next interview you do with us, why don't I just put up all the letters from the Department of Justice attorneys asking the Martinsburg Police, did you find any other records that Danny Casolaro picked up in boxes from IRS? Because the 5 boxes are missing. They were put into his car by a head of security and are missing, including a briefcase stuffed full of envelopes and documents and checks. And all the people, and it wasn't just Dwayne Claridge and Richard Secord's team that was indicted. The directors of BCCI were indicted 2 weeks earlier. And here are the checks, and the new acting head of CIA is being queried by Senator Kerry. Do you have any records that CIA had any bank accounts or transactions with BCCI? And apparently months later, we can't find any records. Well, what about these checks that William Casey and Robert Sensi are using with Ted Shackley and Gorbanafar? Why didn't they put those up? Because they do exist.
Can you let people know where your website is, Peter, so that they can check it out until the next episode?
Okay, so it's at www.the6th-eye.org. The first podcast of The Motive was produced in 2022, and the producers of Netflix downloaded it and watched it and were working with me, promising to help Danny Casolaro reopen this investigation, given the overwhelming evidence that his father was murdered. And that did not happen. And Daniel and I are talking with Trey right now. We're doing our best for the last 5 years to see if we can help him win justice. His father was brilliant, a wonderful investigator, and he gave his life to reveal the truth. It's as simple as that.
Great.
Well, that really wraps up our show. I need to say our disclaimer again. The opinions you hear are ours and that of our guests, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. That wraps up our show for today. This is Uncontrolled Opposition. I'm Gloria Guillo, joined here by Professor Jeremy Kuzmarov. Remember to like and share our broadcast. Your kind support keeps us going. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you next week.